I'm not going to say what Oliver's going to say, but I will introduce Oliver, the Mayor, to welcome you all formally and talk about his manifesto and why he thinks this is important, and then I will take some of the logistics and the chairing of the meeting after that. So, Oliver.
Bro, thank you. Hi everybody, and thank you for making the time to be here with us this evening, not least on the evening of the England game, when I know you will all be going to the pub after this. It is really important. You're absolutely right. This is a really important meeting, a really important development, a really important thing for us to be doing, and it's something I push for, right? So, like, I want to be absolutely clear. This is something I've asked to happen. I think it is vital that we create spaces like this one where we can have open and honest conversations focusing on issues that matter to people in South Yorkshire. One of the things I'm so focused on as mayor is changing how politics works in this country. How do we give people a voice that they have lost is a question that I'm constantly asking, and devolution is one of those routes, I think, to giving people that voice back and allowing people to know that there is somebody in this region, there are people in this region, me, Kilvinda and others, who are here to do what you ask us to do, to listen, to learn, and to take those fights to government if we need to be on people's side. And that's why this is really important. It's a manifesto commitment of mine, but more importantly, it's about values and about principles. The board's going to play a central role in how we hold South Yorkshire Police to account on behalf of our communities, and I'm really grateful therefore that they are here in such a positive way that's really appreciated, and making sure, as I know they want to, the force is delivering against the priorities that we've set out in the police and crime plan, where we're working really well together, and that we're seeing progress where it counts. And I don't want to take that for granted for a moment, because there are places in this country and certainly relationships between politicians and police where this wouldn't be the case. And I'm really grateful to South Yorkshire Police for the proactive way in which they're engaging in this process and absolutely working with us. So thank you very much for everybody for being here. Because the board is about public confidence. Policing only works when people have trust, when they feel heard, when they can see that the issues affecting their lives, our lives, are being taken seriously. As with each meeting going forward today, we're focusing in on one key priority area. The aim is to get to the root of why the issue matters, what's working, where the challenges are, what we and our partners need to change to improve, and this is an open forum. It is a place where we should be open. We're going to cover some sensitive issues, but they are vital issues. Police use of stop and search, use of force, hate crime, police race action plan. None of these are easy conversations or easy topics, I know, but if we engage them in good faith and with a view to trying to help and do the right thing, I think that is the right approach. Recent events have thrown even more light onto those topics, and we all know that, and it's important we take time to understand the police's approach locally, and importantly how the public perceive them. I am acutely conscious as the mayor, somebody that has now been doing this role in relation to the police for 2 years, about the gap between those two things. And I've really appreciated over the last couple of years of being able to gather a better understanding of how the police work, why they work in that way, and more often than not, when I've then been able to understand the police's approach, then been able to see exactly why actions have been taken in the way that they have. But I understand entirely that the community that we represent doesn't always feel that way, and doesn't always feel the same way that I do. And that's what confidence and rebuilding confidence, restoring confidence, or maintaining confidence has to be all about, making sure that people understand the actions of the police, and where necessary the police are able to change. But we are working beyond policing in isolation. There is a representation of services and partnerships here. We all have a part to play in tackling the issues together. So I'm really looking forward to a constructive, focused discussion that helps sharpen our approach, delivers better outcomes for the people that we collectively serve. I will be here for the first half hour of this meeting. I'm afraid I have another meeting after this. But I'm really grateful to everybody for making the time, as I say. I'll hand over to Kilvinda, who's going to ably chair the meeting, and my Deputy for Police and Crime. But again, thank you to everybody for being here.
Thank you, Oliver. So before I move on to tonight's focus, I thought it'd be useful to briefly reiterate why we are here. Cooperative approach to looking at the priorities for South Yorkshire. And before I say anything, I think it's important to remember that policing is a difficult job. officers face dangerous and tragic situations every day. And you know, they're the ones we call when we're in danger, and they're the ones we want to keep us safe. And for that, they have our thanks. Now we're here to do the scrutiny, but it's got to recognise that actually the public service that the police do. So to do this job, they have those unique powers to deprive people of their liberty and use lawful force when necessary. These powers rightly require consent from the community that they are being used correctly and are subject to public scrutiny, and like today, open to some difficult conversations. I'd also like to take this opportunity just to very quickly highlight some of the work we are progressing in the Directorate, because it's an open forum, and I think we should take advantage of the fact that this is being broadcasted. And I should have said at the beginning, if people don't want to be on in terms of the questions, there's some seats right at the back where you will be off camera. So let me just come back to how we're supporting the priorities of the Police and Crime Plan on behalf of the South Yorkshire community. So we've got a real focus on preventing harm, including exploitation, particularly for children and young people. We want to reduce reoffending, and we want to improve access to support for our victims, and importantly strengthen community resilience. Now, this is about getting upstream, this is about tackling the causes of crime, not just responding to it. And a good example of this is the work of our violence reduction team, who have just opened up its community grants fund, supporting projects that prevent violence and reduce harm, with a strong focus this year on knife crime, violence against women and girls, and early interventions for young people. We're also investing in prevention through education with the rollout of a POLED across schools. These are learning materials for people who work with young people to provide the knowledge they need to understand the risks, the law and the consequences of their choices. We've launched the Rural Crime Initiative and have identified just under £500,000 funding to support rural communities affected by issues like theft, vandalism, fly tipping. Since its launch, we've already supported 44 applications, including practical measures like CCTV, lighting and preventative tools. If you know of any community groups, you are members of community groups, please come and talk to us about how to access opportunities to put bids in and access that funding. I also just quickly want to say SIMCA have also recently recruited an individual to coordinate our work with veterans and the wider armed service community, again reaching out to individuals who need our support. So all of this ultimately is to build trust and confidence. Confidence in policing isn't built in a single moment, it won't just come after today's meeting, it's built over time. It's built through the prevention work, it's built through the visible actions, through supporting victims properly, through our working with community partners, and like today, having access to the senior command team to respond to some of the questions. So the issues we are focusing on, Oliver's already said, but just to repeat, we'll look at stop and search, use of force, hate crime and the police action plan in relation to race, which goes to the heart of some of the conversations around public confidence, and as Oliver said, clearly topical. They're complex, challenging, but they are exactly the issues we need to talk about openly if we want to build an understanding, improve practice and actually strengthen the trust. So I really look forward to this constructive and honest discussion. I'm going to pass you on to Matt in a moment, who's going to tell you about the technicalities around it, but let me just say up front, thank you for attending. I'm now going to ask the panel to introduce themselves, and at the end of that, Matt, if you could then just explain the technicalities. So shall we start with you with the introductions, go down and back to you?
Sure. Good evening, good afternoon everyone. My name is Matthew Clay. I'm the Director of Policing here at SIMCA.
Good evening everybody, my name is Lauren Poultney, I'm the Chief Constable of South Yorkshire Police.
Hello everyone, I'm Sarah Pullman, I'm the Deputy Chief Constable of South Yorkshire Police.
Good evening, I'm Simon Wallace, I'm a Chief Superintendent, I'm a District Commander, but I'm also the Strategic Lead for use of force, hate crime and stop and search.
Good evening everyone, I'm Shaz Wood, I'm a Superintendent as the Head of Learning in South Yorkshire Police, but I'm also the Strategic Lead for the Police Race Action Plan.
Great, so just very quickly, I'm going to pretend I'm a technological expert, which I'm not, but we have Slido working this afternoon. If everyone, you have a QR code in front of you, it's a platform that allows you to ask questions and we will respond. I'll be monitoring them and putting them to the panel at the end of each presentation. So there's a QR code on your seats if you would like to engage with it, and indeed it should be available on the screen for those viewing. If you like someone else's question or want to put your own question, just please monitor that, put a thumbs up, and we'll make sure we are gathering together and put them back to the panel at the end of each presentation. Also, you can just put your hand up. We've got roving mics, so if you prefer the old-fashioned style, that will also work. Thank you.
Thank you. So if I may now, I'll hand over to Chief Superintendent Simon Conlon to talk about stop and search. Are you okay?
Yeah. Good evening. Sorry, I can't know if you can see the presentation. So you can
Sally is
share.
putting the presentation up, so it should be. Oh,
Yep,
here it is.
okay.
Perfect.
I was about to say next slide, and you can't see a slide, so that was going to be a great start. Okay, so good afternoon again. So I'm going to talk you through some background context, some of the latest statistics, some of our achievements, and then some of the challenges that we've got within this field. So police use of stop and search, it is broadly strong support from communities within South Yorkshire when it's used correctly. It won't be lost on anyone, the national context and the national anxiety around police use of stop and search over the recent decades, but broadly speaking in South Yorkshire the support has been strong, as I say, where it's used effectively. His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services independently assess our appropriateness of our stop and search tactics, our training, our monitoring and various other elements, and they give us some positive indicators, some of which are that our staff have the knowledge and confidence to interact with the public fairly, that we use body-worn video to capture our interactions with the public, and that we support independent external scrutiny of our processes to give us appropriate feedback from the community in relation to those use of powers. Next slide, please. So there's some statistics on there which are quite small, so I'll briefly talk you through them. So the top line of stop and search, there are searches per 1,000 population in the year to the end of March 2026, so the financial year to the end of March 2026. And in that you can see, for sake of argument, 6,565 white people were searched, which is a ratio of 0.4 to the population. And you can see there that if you are black in this set of data, you are 3.1 times more likely to be stop and searched than a white person within South Yorkshire. The national statistic for that is about 3.8. So in South Yorkshire we sit below that. We sometimes move down to sort of 2.8, 2.9, but the average is sort of 3.1. And then the stop and search positive outcomes. So this is where following the search an action is taken, so it's classed as a positive action. Now that can be that we found an item and the person is arrested, we found an item and they're given some form of out-of-court disposal. So you can see there the percentages across the different ethnic groups. Essentially there is no disproportionality between the positive outcomes for any ethnic group. So if you're white, 34% of white people who are searched have a positive outcome, 35 for black, 35 for Asian, 33 for black, mixed is 35 and other is 33. So from a statistical point of view they would be broadly classed as the same because it's 1 percentage point either side. So what that says is that whilst they're, as a black member of the community, they are 3.1 times more likely to be stop and searched, actually we find things on people in 1 in 3 of every search regardless of ethnicity. So that broadly suggests that 1 in 3 people, regardless of ethnicity, have got something on them that we were looking for. So the ethnicity isn't influencing the positive outcomes. Next slide, please. So this is our infographic which we share on the internet. So this is for the same period. This shows that we conducted 12,177 searches in the year, so broadly 1,000 a month. And this is just a fairly simplistic infographic that we share for the public just to understand what the outcomes of those searches look like and who we're searching. So you can see the vast majority of people that we search are male. You will notice if you're numerically minded that the numbers of male and female don't add up to the 12,177. That's because that doesn't include unattended cars. So the 12,177, it also includes unattended cars that have been searched, because the power allows us to do that. Clearly there's no ethnicity or gender associated with the car. That's why the numbers don't add up. But you can see there, I won't go into each individual item for you, but you can see that we break it down by gender, by ethnicity, by age, and then broken down by districts. So as you'd probably appreciate, Sheffield being the biggest area in South Yorkshire, they account for almost half of the searches, and the others sort of follow suit relatively respectively. And then you can see the items found and the positive outcomes. So 23 firearms were found in the last year, 297 weapons. We found drugs in nearly 3,000 cases out of the 12,000 searches. So you can see for yourself there that the items that are found and the positivity. So a really good indicator for us is the 3,294 on the top line. That's items searched for found. That means we found what we thought we were going to find. What the officer has formed in terms of a reasonable ground for search and the basis of their search, they have then gone on to find that same thing. So it says that they're not just doing speculative searches. They formed an opinion of what they think they might find, and actually in a lot of cases that has been borne out. Okay, next slide please. So our progress and success to date. So in our last peel inspection, we were found to have increased at what's called reasonable grounds. So as officers start to execute a search, they have to have reasonable grounds, and they have to articulate what those reasonable grounds are to search. We don't just stop and search people for the sake of it. And in our previous inspection, we were about 76% where we thought the reasonable grounds were suitable. In our latest inspection, that went up significantly and up to 92.4%, which puts us pretty much where the rest of the country is. As the strategic lead heading into another peel inspection, my desire is that we get that above 95%. And some of that is not necessarily that the reasonable grounds aren't there, it's about the way that it's articulated by the officers. I think if you then go back and ask them a week later, talk me through that again, actually they can articulate the reasonable grounds, they just haven't recorded it particularly well or articulated it particularly well on body-worn video. But that's what we assess, so that's quite right. And a lot of that improvement has come from introducing the drive of see, know, suspect. So that's the three headings that we ask officers to consider. So what have you seen? What's the person doing? What do we know about them? What do our intelligence report? Is there intelligence already about this? And what do you suspect that activity might mean? And by the officers having to break it down into those three areas has really driven up our reasonable grounds. Obviously the second one you've already seen is the infographic. That again was, we were asked to share our infographic, so we've shared our infographic around use of force on the public facing internet for a number of years, and HMIC asked us to do the same for stop and search, so that is now live on the internet, that same infographic that you saw on the previous slide. Rather than going into reams and reams of data for 12,000 searches, we think that gives you the best infographic way of understanding it. And then the internal and external scrutiny panels. So they're really key for us in terms of actually that check and balance, very much as this evening is, that check and balance of, so we've assessed what our reasonable grounds are, we think we're doing okay, HMIC have had a look and they think we're doing okay, but actually what do the public think? And that's where that external scrutiny panel has been absolutely invaluable. I know some of you here are members of the external scrutiny panel, so thank you for that. And actually I'd ask you to consider if there's anyone else that you know that would want to be part of that, we'd more than welcome it. And certainly some of the things that have been fed back from the external scrutiny panel, I have to say it's been largely positive on the grounds for searching, and the officer communication and the information provided. So the interaction between officer and the person that's being searched has been deemed to be pretty positive. And there have been individual cases of self-defined ethnicity recording, which I'll come on to in a moment, and then occasional feedback points from the panel. And I think anyone that's on the panel will vouch for me when we say, when the external scrutiny panel reviews a case, and we take it all the way through, they watch the body-worn video, they read the log, they have a look, and then they have a discussion. And actually some of the sort of minor points have been broadly officer specific rather than collectively as a force, as in didn't really like the way the officer did that, or could they have considered terming that slightly different. And the real positive there is that feedback is then taken back to the individual officer and their sergeant. We sit down and have a discussion with them. They understand where the scrutiny panels come from, and then we hope to make the change. If, of course, we do identify through that panel that there is a more broad spread problem that's not down to an individual officer, then we've got the capacity then to take that back through and actually take it then through Shaz's team in terms of into training and actually have a fresh look at our training. Is there something we need to do differently if it becomes a pattern or a trend? Next slide, please. And then I guess sort of finally really then sort of around risks and challenges and plans. So HMIC identified for us that that whilst we do every stop and search form that is submitted goes from the officer to their sergeant for sign off, and actually the sign off wasn't probably as comprehensive as we'd have liked. That said, we have the external scrutiny panel that scrutinises cases every quarter. We have the internal scrutiny panel that does the same. And then at every district and department, we have an individual that dip samples a significant number of stop and searches each month anyway. So we have a fairly broad spread, but as you appreciate, 1,000 a month, that still wasn't statistically that significant. So we've incorporated it now that we've made changes to our system, so every supervisor now has oversight of every individual forms, and we can now dictate which forms get a deeper dive. Which forms get a deeper dive, which forms get the body-worn video review as well, which forms are just a tabletop. We'll have a read through and make sure actually does that sound right, or is that starting to form a pattern? So we can do that. And then the last point really is then about a sort of national and local focus now around actually we're really mindful of the impact on young people who are subject to stop and searches. It's been well documented and publicised over decades. So we're really mindful of that in terms of the impact we can have on the individual. I think what's probably not been captured nationally is around, well, what do we do with that then in terms of that individual child? So certainly our theme lead and their deputy have just started on a piece of work which is this stop search safeguard. So for every child that is now stop and searched in South Yorkshire, there'll be a vulnerable child form that will be submitted, and that will go through to our local referral unit and through into children's social care at the individual district to review back then through what the circumstances of this child. Is there a wider concern about why they were on High Street at 2 o'clock in the morning being searched by a police officer? Well, we've concluded the search and we find nothing, but actually why is that child on that street at that time? What is it about the family? So we're closing that loop and that's rolling out. We have a slight issue around our data because our data that you'll see on the earlier slide about the ages incorporates 18 and 19-year-olds who aren't children, but they fall into that age bracket, so we just need to delineate out the 18 and 19-year-olds. That said, there's no harm in them being captured at the moment because arguably some 18 and 19-year-olds, it's still worth us looking at why they might have well been searched in that area. And I think that's the last slide for stop and search.
Right, let's see how this works then in terms of technology. Matt, you.
Yeah, so bear with us. As first things first, this is new. I just want to put it out there. So I've got 5 questions that have come through to me, but the team have flagged that perhaps they can't see them. So first of all, I mean, if anyone had a question and they want to say it out loud, this is an opportunity to. Otherwise, I can just read them out on behalf of people. I'm not clear what's come in from. Yeah, would you like to?
So I have to confess that all 5 questions are mine. That's why you couldn't get on. No. The QR code is working fine for me, but clearly I'm being sabotaged because the team can't see it. Thank you so much for that comprehensive. Things that I want to
I think
is you mentioned that there are independent members or external members on your scrutiny team. Because everything seems absolutely amazing from the presentation, but experience and old age has taught me that's never the case.
No, absolutely.
I'm really keen to understand as community members, and it's a bit difficult doing it in this way. I would have thought the dynamic of the room would have been different, so we could be equal and feel equals in this conversation. But I think there is something about the clarity of esteem. If people are giving you independent scrutiny and advice, that learning is then shared in an open and transparent way to build the trust that you're very keen to develop. So it'd be helpful to understand that.
Absolutely. So the feedback that we get from the external scrutiny panel hasn't as yet identified any sort of systemic issue across the organisation. What it has identified is pockets of individual officers that have not quite performed as we would hope they would do, or they've made minor errors. So that feedback has gone back to the individual officers and then been brought back to the external scrutiny panel at the next meeting. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it would be appropriate to share publicly feedback with individual officers, because one, it's not really fair to them, and two, it probably wouldn't paint an accurate picture in terms of the behaviour of 3,000 officers for one person who's had some feedback. But we definitely do take that feedback and bring it back to the external scrutiny panel and say, this is what you raised last time, this is what we've done with it, and this is what the officers said. We have offered the opportunity for the officers to come back to the scrutiny panel and sit and hear it for themselves.
Hi, as somebody who's actually been on the scrutiny panels and been part of that process, both from a kind of looking at the video cams and then the discussion that's had afterwards, there is very much a focus on learnings in terms of what they see, where there's gaps, language that could be better or approaches, and part of that process is clearly the key force members documenting all that, taking all that back, because we've been asking exactly that same question. Is the closed loop in place where the individuals are fed back to where improvements can be made or changes can be made, and that was really refreshing to watch. The other bit's kind of fairly straightforward, but that last learning piece was the bit that excited me more than anything else, and I think that's partly the question you're asking. Does that make sense? Okay.
I just want to pick up what you said about we've put this style in a very conventional way, but if you've got any ideas of what we could do differently, I'd be really happy to listen.
May I respond to that?
Of course you can.
I don't need a mic.
I think that's a really valid point and something that we can take away.
There is a question here that I'll just pull out. So someone has asked around participation in scrutiny panels and communication with non-English speakers. So in sort of the absence of professional interpreters, how is that going to work? And also I think there's a link here to kind of records of searches that kind of potentially went wrong, or whether language might have been a barrier if someone hasn't understood the grounds for what they've been searched for. Is there any kind of work that's gone on around that, I think is the question.
Sorry, is that two questions? One's about the...
One is about, I think, kind of interpretation on panels, and if people have English not as their first language, and the second part is around if that language barrier might produce not so positive outcomes actually in stop and searches operationally.
Okay. So the first element, that's definitely something we can look at. I know certainly from our stop and search external scrutiny panel, we're trying something new next week. So historically we've done them, and they've tended to be Sheffield based. So from next week, apologies. Sorry. Historically it's been based Sheffield based, but from next week we're going to try doing 3 sites all at the same time, providing technology doesn't let us down. So just to try to spread it out across the county and give wider opportunity for participation. But definitely the non-English speaking piece, we can definitely explore that going forward. I think let's get next week out of the way, make sure the technology doesn't let us down, but it's definitely something we'll look at. And then in terms of the stop and searches, arguably if the officers are using a stop and search in somebody which English isn't their first language, and they are having difficulty understanding, they do have access to interpreter line, which they should then use to interpret the conversation that they're having, and not just go straight into a search with somebody that doesn't understand it. And certainly if we found that was the case, then that would be absolutely something we'd be looking into. But it's not ever been brought to my attention before. So.
Sorry, I didn't want to push in. I was just saying I've got a question, but I just wanted to make sure it wasn't in front of anybody else. It was just after a meeting I went to last night as a member here as well, might want to expand on it. I was just in a, I won't say where because it's not fair because the individuals are not here who said it, but it was around if you have a child that's been arrested, so this is slightly expanding on the stop and search, but you're here, you might be able to help. It linked in with the safeguarding piece. I really like the stop, search, safeguard. When you are arresting a child or a young person and there is a need for an appropriate adult, what's the workaround in terms of ensuring the best person's the appropriate adult? So if you've got a parent or a relative who wants to do it, but yet there might have been a witness, and how that works, and how do you ensure the safeguarding then? How do you get that appropriate adult or find another relative? Sorry, it's a bit expanding on this, but I think you understand the premise of child being interviewed, need appropriate adult, can't be a parent. How do we safeguard?
I mean, certainly the primary route for us would be preferably a family member, somebody who has the best interest of the child because they are that close family member. Clearly, if that's not possible because they're a witness or a victim, then we do obviously have the appropriate adult service, which is an independent service of suitably vetted, trained, accredited people that will come in and act as the appropriate adult for that individual child, and their sole focus is the safeguarding of the child. They're not involved in the investigation, they're not involved in any legal advice, they're there purely to look after the safety of the child.
I have another question here which might be yours, Fatima, but I think it's an interesting one. So the question is, what changes have been made as a result of the external scrutiny feedback, and are those changes being published? Is there anything that you could really highlight in terms of things you've learned from those independent input?
Probably not so much in the stop and search field, but certainly in the use of force, which will be our next presentation, where we also have external scrutiny. There's definitely there's more generic learning for us there in terms of across the organisation, which I can touch on now, or we can cover when we get to that presentation. I don't mind which.
Can we ask Chief Superintendent on the diversity of the external scrutiny members? Do they represent the communities in South Yorkshire? Because that might impact the learning too. Forgive me, I just didn't want you to.
Yeah, we try as hard as we can to make as diverse a group of diverse a panel as we possibly can, and this has been something that we revisit probably every 6 months, and have done for the last 3.5 years that I've had this role. And I'm sure the panel member will back me up that panel members are quite difficult to recruit to, and actually the longevity of panel members isn't great, which is a little bit of a frustration for us, because actually we get some really good engaged people, but actually to keep them engaged is quite difficult. So we've approached the Police Race Action Plan previously to try to encourage people. We've advertised externally. We've done social media campaigns to try to encourage people to join the panel. So we really do try as best we can to get as diverse a group as possible.
I just wanted to add that I've been involved in one of the problem-solving projects with your officers through the university to literally look at that exact issue of diversity in the external scrutiny panels. So I know that it is a priority, and it's been actively worked on by officers and the university together. And we identified lots of problems and barriers, but it's absolutely something that was discussed and worked on and continued to be.
Can I just come in there? So if it's about advertising, promoting and encouraging people to join, how are we making sure that we're reaching out potentially to people in this room who represent organisations who could then do that? Are we reaching out to organisations similar to people in this room?
The problem-solving project that I was involved in was the very start of that. It was the officers looking at the evidence base and where the issues were, and looking at the start of finding those solutions, I suppose. So I don't know where it went after that point, but I know it was started.
Yeah, we've continued with that drive. We've approached as many wide variety of groups we've engaged with, local community safety partnerships. We've engaged with through KINS through key individual networks at individual neighbourhood areas for groups or smaller groups that they may well engage with, just to try to encourage people to join the panel. The strength in the panel is its diversity. So the more diverse the panel is, the better the feedback we get, the better the more rounded feedback we get. So we would actively welcome more people to join, and the more diverse the better.
My name's David Bissell. I'm Chief Executive at SACMA Health and Social Care, which is a Caribbean and African adult social care provider. But I'm also a pastor in one of the black majority churches, and my ears pricked up straight away because we also coordinate a grouping of faith organisations, largely in the black Christian sphere, but I'm also a candidate at the Anglican Cathedral, and I'm not sure that the wider community engagement and promoting scrutiny panels through trusted organisations like ours has happened in terms of a way of perhaps identifying people who would want to contribute to a panel. So I guess that's a criticism, but it's also an offer that it's a route into a wider group of people who could be, at least information could be shared so that people have the opportunity to take it up or not.
Thank you, David. No, and part of this evening we wanted to use this opportunity to extend that invite out to everybody to either cascade it amongst your groups and your representatives, or if there's people that want to sign up today, absolutely, we would welcome that. And I think there's probably an opportunity with Simca to work on your links in addition to our links to make sure we're not missing people like yourselves. So I think there's an opportunity to move forward on that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. One more question and then we will move on to the next presentation, but if you have got the Slido working, just keep adding the questions and we'll make sure we have a roundup. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Adrian Bent. Let's go back to the disproportionality ratio. My question is, what evidence shows disproportionality is reducing? What evidence shows that?
Apologies, sorry, I'm trying to answer the question. There's three things at once. You've challenged me there. Sorry, two's a challenge usually. There is no evidence of reducing disproportionality. What there is, and the Deputy Mayor's seen this, as have the 4 community safety partnerships, is some in-depth work we've carried out in the last year around actually a greater understanding of where we're using these powers across different ethnic groups. Well, actually, so you're 3.1 times more likely to be stopped and searched if you're black in South Yorkshire, but that doesn't apply across the whole county. Actually, where are we using these powers, and where do they? And the analysis is really interesting because that then overlays with actually where our crime and incident demand is. So it's not just if you're a young black man just wandering in South Yorkshire, you're more likely to be searched. It's actually, well, where's the crime data? Where does our crime data say crimes are occurring and incidents are occurring? And when you overlay the two, there's a really close parallel between the two sets of data. So it's not, whilst it is quite a stark figure, it doesn't represent sort of searches all across the county, just indiscriminately. And I suppose the positive, if you like, if there is such thing, is actually is the positive outcome rate. So it doesn't show that there's a disproportionate level of searching of black people particularly, because we're finding things in an equal proportion as everybody else. So it's not just indiscriminately searching black people. With the reasonable grounds, we're still at 90+%, that's across the board, and actually we're still finding things in 33, 34, 35% of cases.
Just one final quick one, I think, because it's aimed at Simca and it's good to not suggest that it's only going to the police. So the question is around measuring the impact of stop and search on community confidence and our role to check that South Yorkshire Police is applying it proportionately. I think on the first one you've heard some of the evidence here today that broadly speaking those outcome levels are kind of fairly equal, and that's a really positive reflection for us. The piece around community confidence is obviously much more around perception, and that's kind of why we're here today, to hear from you all. We do have pieces of work looking at youth engagement and potentially a survey from Simca to get some of that more, I guess, feedback from the community, and it's an ongoing piece. So in terms of the statistics you've heard from the Chief Superintendent there, we feel that they kind of look in a relatively positive place. There's been the briefing we've heard about there, but the perception amongst the community and that confidence piece is really ongoing. That's kind of a big part of why we're here today.
I think I'd just add to that, particularly because we've referred to the recent media attention around policing, and we're here today scrutinising the data, looking at issues of disproportionality and the way the police, and how do we get that out to people. So we're trying today, and hopefully that will cascade, and whatever the next agenda item, we might have to find a bigger venue because people will be interested in the topics. And so the confidence piece is actually part of it, is how do we engage communities. And from my personal view, I see confidence where police officers are having local conversations with local residents and local communities, be it a formal organisation who invites them, or be it one of the, I forgot what LAC stands for the local area committee, thank you very much. But that's where confidence comes from most, when residents are talking to police, they see action happening on the issues, and hopefully that's where neighbourhood policing will be strengthened. And it's going to take time, as we said, it's not a one-off, but let's just keep doing this. Did you want to come out, and then we'll move on? Yeah.
Quick comment, and that goes on to that commitment around engaging with different demographics, and we find that in our scrutiny panels, they tend to be the older generation because they've got the time and the focus on this. And actually in our PRAP work, we've identified the real need through the IAG and ourselves, the need to engage with young people. They are the ones on the streets, aren't they, on the later evenings, in the nighttime economy. But we're not engaging with them. It's quite difficult to engage. But we've started a project, and in the next month, a couple of weeks, Shaz, we're doing 2 events with young people in a school, and we hope that they'll give us a baseline, and we can go back to them again, the same group, and ask them what's changing, so we can start to assess, as a result of these conversations, is that helping you to understand policing, understand our powers more, feel confident in challenging us, etc., etc. And it gives us that baseline about a group of young people that we can go back to into the future and say, okay, what difference is this making for you? Is this having the impact that you want it to have? So we're literally, I think it's the 23rd of June, so in the next week or so, we start that piece of work. And we're really hopeful that through engaging them and really taking on board their feedback, they'll be then interested to come back again and tell us their views in a year's time, 6 months' time. And if we can expand that, depending on the success, let's look about how we can expand that across the county. We're doing that in Sheffield, but we're really cognizant that a lot of our conversations kind of centre on Sheffield, but actually we've got communities across all of South Yorkshire that we are keen to hear from. So it's just a point around our commitment to engaging right across the demographics.
Thank you. I'm sure some more questions will come up after the next presentation, which is use of force. So is it you again, Sam?
Yeah. Thank you. If I can, just before we start on that, just on that last point, the perfect thing for me would be an external scrutiny panel with young people who've got lived experience of being stopped and searched. That would be so. If you can encourage any young people who've been subject to stop and search to be part of an external scrutiny panel, that would be amazing, because they are the people that actually we want to hear from. What did it feel like to be interacted with by our officers in that scenario? So, sorry, apologies, sir. Off track slightly. Sorry, next slide. Okay, so use of force. So use of force is just for clarity then. In terms of use of force, that doesn't mean that people are being hit with batons or being kicked. A use of force is anything from taking hold of someone's arm through to lethal force. So, and it's the broad spectrum. So there's a plan on a page there which our thematic lead has pulled together, and again the HMI CFRS give us really clear guidance around what are positive indicators for us as a force, and they again include that our staff have the knowledge and confidence to interact with the public, again that we use body-worn video, and again that we have external scrutiny panels, and that when we record the force, it's justified, proportionate and fair. The additional piece then is also about recording of our use of force, which I'll come on to. So next slide please. So again, very similar sort of statistical graph, if you like, chart. So use of force, and this is based by per thousand population, again on the top graph, and you'll see that there are 14,061 for white, 835 for black, 809 for Asian, and it means that as a black person in South Yorkshire, you're 2.1 times more likely to have force used against you. That's a little bit misleading, in so much as the police don't just use force on anybody walking down the street. We use force in the vast majority of cases, and the vast majority of cases where somebody is being arrested. So, and somebody being arrested would be classed then as a suspect or for the arrest. So, in terms of based on the population that we arrest and the proportionality that we arrest, you'll see that there is much less disproportionality in the use of force on black people when they are counted against the cohort of people that are arrested, as opposed to just the general population across the whole county, because we don't use force on the whole population just indiscriminately. So whilst it does look significantly higher for the resident population, as I say, there's no disproportionality in terms of the arrest. I can explain that a little bit more at the end if people have got questions about that. Next slide, please. So again, this is the infographic that I talked about earlier, so you'll notice it marries up very similarly to the stop and search. The stop and search actually matches this one. This is the one we've been publishing on our Force website for a number of years, and this shows you that in the year to the end of March, we had 21,864 use of force records, but that doesn't mean that's 21,864 individuals. So if all 4 police officers on this panel arrest 1 person, all 4 police officers have to submit a form. So that'll be 4 forms for 1 person. And actually, in every form, we have to highlight every individual use of force tactic that we used. So you'll see on the top left of the boxes, 21,000 of those are tactical communication. So that means the officer just talking to the person, trying to de-escalate, trying to talk them around, trying to get agreement compliance just through verbal discussion. And you'll go down there, you'll see actually baton used is 55 occasions out of nearly 22,000. So whilst that might be something that grabs a headline or attracts social media attention, the reality is, in this force, that is a really small statistic. Likewise, you can see there Parva drawn. So Parva drawn is 227, Parva used is 378. So really small proportion. So Parva is pepper spray, CS spray, incapacitant spray. Firearms drawn, so 179. So if we deploy to a firearms incident and firearms officers draw their weapon and go towards aim, then that will be classed as a firearm used. But as again, you can see, really, really small number. And the amount of taser there, again, which is one that particularly grabs the public's attention, is 777 occasions. But that doesn't mean it's been discharged 777 times. Taser used also includes taser drawn, taser red dotted, so they'll put the laser dot on somebody. Often that gets compliance, just the use of the dot, but that is classed as a use of taser. So the barbs haven't been fired, no one's been incapacitated, no one's been taken to the floor with it. It just means that it's been used in a capacity to try to gain compliance. So whilst the number looks relatively high, it's not. Again, you can see there the breakdown of gender, ethnicity, age, and the number of officers who've been assaulted in that time period. Next slide, please. So our progress and success. So we've had significant improvement in the last year, increased our number of submissions, and that's gone up 366%. So the metric that HMIC FRS use is the number of forms that we submit balanced against the number of people we book into our custody suites. And at the moment there is still a disparity. We do still have less use of force forms than people through our custody suite. And I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail on the next slide. Body worn video, again that's 92%, and it was used by, when it was used, and the device was used by officers on 88% of occasions, and it either wasn't available or it wasn't activated in time. So if an officer gets into an altercation really quickly and doesn't get a chance to turn their camera on, it obviously won't capture. If they turn it on, it will capture the past 30 seconds that haven't been recorded. So if they get a chance to turn it on, it will capture a lot. But sometimes they just don't get a chance if they have to lay hands on somebody straight away. Again, internal external scrutiny panel, which I think we've already talked about, and to take your points about the feedback. Some of the feedback from that external scrutiny panel has been about officers' ability to de-escalate, and particularly where there's been quite a violent confrontation. So where there's been multiple officers or a single officer that's been in quite a violent confrontation, and has gained compliance and has managed to get someone into handcuffs, as you probably appreciate, if you've ever been frustrated by somebody, actually that then ability just to then calm yourself right back down and then just go back into normal language is quite tricky. But that's something that we've noticed that we definitely need to work on, and that's gone back through to training, and that's now highlighted in our use of force training, that actually once you've got compliance you need to literally take a breath and calm yourself, because that was something that came through the external screening panel in that feedback. And then governance and analysis to drive improvement. We've now got on our business intelligence dashboard, we've got a really useful dashboard for all of our first and second line supervisors to now to be able to delve into individual officers' use of force submissions, what the ethnicity of the people were that they used the force against, what tactics they used, whether they de-escalated. So that gives us a really good insight down to individual officer level. And so certainly when you come to disproportionality, which we talked about earlier, well, we can see down to an individual officer. Is there an individual officer that's using force in a disproportionate way? We can really see that level of detail. Next slide, please. And then the sign-off. So again, sign-off is very similar to the stop and search. We now need to take that back through individual supervisors so that they scrutinise that and they watch the body-worn video in appropriate circumstances. We plan to use the business intelligence a little bit better so that we can now monitor that over a period of time, so that we can start to look at if there are any patterns and trends. We do need to increase our recording of self-defined ethnicity, and that's been and that is not unique to use of force. That's something more generally across the force. We've got a programme of work ongoing at the moment, and we've got some training videos about to be refreshed, and that's about the officers asking the individual what they self-define as in terms of ethnicity, and the accuracy of our recording there isn't as good as it perhaps should be, and it's anywhere between sort of 10 and 20% we're missing, which makes the analysis of disproportionality more difficult, because there's a swathe of people we just don't know. Now we can, the work that I talked about earlier, we've then done a deeper dive in terms of those individuals and what have we recorded their ethnicity as, which isn't ideal, but if they've come into custody and we've recorded their ethnicity, then it tends to not be too far away from what people self-define as. We've used that as a benchmark just to say, well, what would that broadly give us? And it doesn't change the disproportionality figures necessarily, but the panacea would be much better to have the individual tell us what their self-defined ethnicity is. We're hoping with system changes later in the year that we won't need to ask that on every individual occasion. If we ask a person once, if we interact with them 3 or 4 times, we don't need to ask them every time. At the moment, we need to ask you every single time, and we have to record it every time. And if we miss one, it's classed as a miss. And so that's part of the force-wide accuracy campaign. This is the accuracy campaign for the force around actually what that looks like, and also the location of where we're doing those things. And I think that's the last. No, there's one more slide. Apologies. I'm getting ahead of myself. Apologies. So the HMIC focus again is all around the children, which we've talked about earlier, and we have started a piece of work again very similar to stop and search. If we use force on a child, we're now submitting a vulnerable child form on every occasion. So it goes back to your point earlier about actually children to custody, but we have the same where if children have force used against them, and we have got a really good understanding, a really rich picture for our understanding of disproportionality, our level of force, stop and search, vehicle checks, detained under Mental Health Act. We've got a really broad spectrum of data across geography and ethnicity that gives us a really good understanding of what that looks like. And I'll briefly touch on it. We've taken that to the 4 community safety partnerships to ask them and to help them to understand actually what that looks like locally for them in their own areas, in terms of actually what's the role of education and health in some of this, because arguably if we don't change things a little bit further upstream, then unfortunately some people will still be subject to stop and search and still be subject to use of force if the intelligence sits around them or they commit offences. But actually we need to look to try to get ahead of that, and what do we need to change more locally. I think I'm right in saying that is the last slide. Is that the last one? Yeah, that was brilliant.
Thank you, Simon, for that. Again, a lot of rich information in there. I don't know if the tech is working, otherwise we can pop some hands up.
The tech appears to be working, but I'm conscious if you've asked a question in the room, it might be better coming from you than me, if anyone would like to ask a question. If not, I'll jump in. So there's one picking up on a point that Simon made, I think, around particularly where officers or teams seem to use force more frequently. The question here is, what do you do about that? Do you see that?
The force has to be linked to an arrest. So if officers were using force to make an arrest, that's where it'll get flagged. If it looks as though the force has been in any way excessive, then that's where it'll get picked up through the supervisor sign-off. And actually then, if we start to get any suggestion that an individual officer is being heavy-handed, then that's where we'll just really do a deep dive into their interactions, watching their body-worn video back, and just making sure that that's not the case. And if need be, then going down the feedback route, or more serious if we need to. But absolutely, it'll be captured. And clearly, some of that comes from public complaints. So if an individual was to complain that actually they felt the force used against them had been excessive, we have the ability to go back and look at the form, watch the body-worn video. If they've been brought into custody, look at the custody CCTV, and we can get a really good understanding of what that looks like.
Do you think you could just expand? Because I think we've talked about advice, support, management advice, etc. But what if you thought something was excessive? I think it might be helpful on a public scrutiny to say, well, what happens when you think it could be excessive? How do you do that?
Okay, so we have a professional standards department, as do all police forces. So if there was any concern, and all complaints go through our professional standards department as well. So if there was a complaint received about excessive force, that would be recorded in our professional standards. The inquiries that Simon's articulated would be undertaken, i.e., let's go and get the body-worn video is key to this, because it gives you that contemporaneous view. But also, CCTV in the vicinity, so there would be that retrieval of evidence and ascertain, okay, what's a view. If it is deemed that there's excessive force, that would then move into the misconduct space, and a determination will be made as to whether we deem it to be gross misconduct or misconduct. So gross misconduct being you can be dismissed, misconduct being the maximum sanction is a written warning, final written warning. So it would be determined. Excessive force, if we believe someone has been assaulted, would be into the gross misconduct space every single time. There is absolutely no doubt with that. An investigation is undertaken, and then that individual would be taken to what we call a gross misconduct hearing, where it is chaired by an we have an independent legal advisor, we have 2 independent panel members, and then it is chaired by an assistant chief officer. And they will then make a determination on the balance of probabilities as to whether that was excessive or not, and that person could be liable to lose their job as a result. There is also the criminal route. So if we were so concerned about the behaviour, it wasn't limited to using the force necessary to affect the arrest. If we were like, this is really beyond the threshold, that would become a criminal assault. And that investigation by our professional standards department would be liaising with CPS to make a determination as to whether they charge that individual with a criminal offence. And then the misconduct would follow on the back of the criminal offence, so they would go to court, and then we would deal with gross misconduct thereafter. And we have had a number, single figures, but a number of officers that have gone down the criminal route and the gross misconduct route in the last 12 months.
Thank you. Bottom is there. No.
Thank you. Me again, Chief. So one of the roles that I have in Sheffield is I chair the Community Cohesion Task Force, which is why I'm here today, because I think trust with communities is really important to support community cohesion. And one of the reflections that I've had on both of your presentations was, if I am mindful of the literacy age of the average person in the UK being 8 years old, I would really struggle to follow a lot of what you've discussed today. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if I don't trust you, which a lot of people who have the trauma and lived experience of being from an ethnically diverse background, why would I necessarily believe what you say at face value? And if we're truly trying to achieve a relationship with communities where there is trust and we understand some of the challenges that you're bringing to us and asking for our help for, I just wondered whether there are ways in which we can communicate this in a much more accessible way. Because with the greatest of respect, I would never come to your website and look at an infograph. Can't see my mum doing it either, or any of my extended family. So I suppose my offer to you, as part of the work of the Community Cohesion Task Force, is to have a very open and frank conversation in the interest of constructive challenge of how do we explore some of these complex issues, because it sounds like from what you're saying the disproportionality is justified, but what sometimes we're not getting to the rub of, and you think about the police race action plan, is the trauma of lived experience and impact and intent. So irrespective of whether you thought that force was justified, if that person doesn't feel that way, how is that restorative justice encountered? And you talked a lot, Detective Chief Constable, of the formal process, but sometimes a person doesn't want a formal process, they just want the validation that someone's heard them. So I do wonder whether there are human elements of these processes that we could collaboratively work on as peers to really make this feel like there is a human element, because at the moment I'm a corporate person, so I get it, but I'm thinking of a lot of people that I work with that would really struggle, and we need them at the table too.
Thank you. I think that's a really important question, and just let's take another one and then we'll bring it back. And it's Deputy Chief Constable. I know Sarah would not mind whatever, but
My apologies. Don't you worry about
no,
it.
she doesn't care. I'm just correcting. David.
Yeah, thank you. Just on the back of some of what Fatima has said, I'm sat here and reflecting. There's been, and I can see the link, but there's been two really chunky bits of information that impact on communities around stop on search and around use of force. And it feels like, and I'm not sure whether this is what this is about, this confidence board is about, or whether the plan is for somewhere else, but it feels like there's lots of conversations to be had, lots of relationship building, lots of challenge that we are not going to be able to do in this kind of setting. And we've had comments about the layout and all the rest of it, but it feels like I would want the space to really drill down into some of these issues that have been raised. So for instance, to stop and search, I want to know more about the geographic data. Yes, we've got the numbers here, we've got the percentages, but I really want to drill down into the disproportionality, and I want to understand the term black, define what we mean by the term black. And I don't know what a positive outcome is. So what might be a positive outcome for the police might not be a positive outcome for me. So I just feel, I wonder if there's another way or something that we can do outside of here that will help us to drill down and for it to be a more collaborative conversation.
You've hit the nail on the head. This is the start of the conversation. This is why you've come. So that I'm going to look down on Sarah's, I know, desperately wants to come back because of the work you've been doing with, forgotten what the acronym is, IAG, but there's people here from the IAG wanting to strengthen it. So this is exactly where we want to get to, the what next. So Sarah.
Yeah, no, thank you both. I think it's a really valid point about accessibility, you know, and I guess we need to feed lots of different, I'm saying masters, but they're not masters, but you know what I mean. We need to feed lots of different levels of engagement. And so we would have, and the data that David, you just referenced there, we have huge amounts of data, you know, and sometimes we have to be careful because we overwhelm people with data. So again, it's thinking about accessibility, the right audience with the right approach, and I think so there's levels of engagement, but absolutely, you know, we've got one of our comms team at the back, we will absolutely take that point around about accessibility and a graduated response to that engagement. I think it's absolutely key. The point about trust, like you say, and David alluded to it as well, around this is we think is a positive outcome, but for the person undergoing it probably doesn't feel that way, and there is that inevitable disparity, and we, I guess, I just try and explain from our perspective, we have to fill out forms. You've heard the amount of bureaucracy we have to do to feed the Home Office data requests and to understand it ourselves. If we didn't have the data, we wouldn't even know about disproportionality. So I think there's an absolutely valid point about getting the data, having that accurate recording, but it's how we use that data. So we have to have that data for certain reasons, and we have to follow processes for certain reasons. It's based on in law, in regulations, but it's about how we communicate that, isn't it, then, in a non-policey, non-jargony way that will then resonate, and actually listen to that procedural justice piece of, yeah, okay, we did the right thing, we're confident we did the right thing, but actually if it's still left that person who was stop searched with nothing found feeling, well, I don't want to go and speak to the police anymore, then we haven't achieved our objective. So there's something absolutely we need to develop more. And David, we've talked about the PRAP IAG, we've delved into this data a number of times at the PRAP IAG. I'd love you or one of your colleagues to come along and join our PRAP IAG and have and continue those conversations. That's one place we can do it, but there are others that I'm sure we can come up with as a combined effort with Simca about how do we strengthen those conversations. It's very welcome.
Thank you. Microphone, please.
Thank you. Akila Mohammed, Deputy Lieutenant, South Yorkshire, and Director of Healthy Her in Doncaster. A bit of a big up for Doncaster, I think, police, because so with the Healthy Her group, we have two of our police ladies that come, Rebecca Johnson and Lisa, regularly. They do come to the DCT, I think, but they're great because they do come and have a chat with the ladies. And I've absolutely got to say, Pete Thorpe is amazing. Always there at the end of the phone, and our IAGs are not so great at the minute, but we're starting them up again. So, and Doncaster had IAGs for a long time, and they used to have a men's and women's, and they were really well attended. So we're going to start and try and get them up again. But yeah, Doncaster, I think the communication, and actually Pete's actually we talked about the younger people within Doncaster and how we can get them engaged, and he's actually invited us all to the police station and bring the children the summer holidays, so that's great. So yeah, I think just wanted to give them a little bit of a big up there. Thank you.
That's very kind. Sarah, can I look to you to explain what IAG is, because
Oh, sorry. Yeah, all these acronyms. I said about non-policey, didn't I? And then there I was throwing it out there. Okay, so Police Race Action Plan, we call it PRAP for short, Independent Advisory Group, which is what's just been referred to. So we have IAGs in lots of different areas. So we have the Police Race Action Plan one. We've had a Violence Against Women and Girls, VORG, IAG, for a number of years since 2021, that I was formally involved in quite heavily. We have individual districts, so the Doncaster, Barnsley, Sheffield and Rotherham IAGs. We've had other IAGs in the past as well, based on specific community need. So absolutely, these the IAGs, the purpose of them is to have those critical and constructive conversations, be our critical friend, and the emphasis is on critical, giving that feedback, that lived experience of how policing feels and for the communities that we police, and to test if we think, okay, well, we want to make these changes, actually how do you think this is going to go down, actually get some feedback so that we can tweak policies and procedures based on community voices. So that's the purpose of an independent advisory group. I think it is true that they come and go in terms of, say, have really strong entities, and then because we are asking a lot of people, and I think we do realise that, and with scrutiny panels, the same thing. We're asking a lot of time and effort of people who work really hard during the day and then give up their evenings to come along and help us, and so it is a big ask. But we are constantly looking at ways of how we can strengthen them, be more inclusive, more diverse, and make sure that we're getting that diversity of opinion feeding into us.
Thank you, Sarah. And we use the word diverse a lot and inclusive, and I think we all need to remember that is in the widest term. So this is about diversity of thought, diversity of experience. So this isn't any one particular track we're talking about. So we need different voices, different races, different abilities, different gender. We just need difference in our IAGs and forums like this. Every voice is really important, everybody's experience is really important. So I think we just need to be really upfront. Diversity, inclusion, equality is for everybody. There is nobody that it specialises in. Okay, you're going to rattle through, Matt, a couple of things, and we're going to get back to the next presentation on hate crime.
Yeah, thank you, Govinda. I think they're more kind of comments than questions, but one is around engaging with young people in schools, and an offer from Bibiana to work particularly around multicultural pupils to explore some of these issues. So I'm sure we follow. Brilliant. There's a few comments around better understanding of disproportionality data. I think the point David's understanding the geography, the locations, the kind of the uses of it, the follow-up. So, and ask for more understanding of the kind of the depth of the data around that. There is a specific.
Sorry, Matt, can I just say one thing? And it was alluded to in Simon's presentation, but he was busy trying to get through it all, I think it's fair to say. We are working with Sheffield Hallam University as well. So we had a data analyst who worked with us for 2-3 years, who did a fantastic job trying to pull overlay data that wasn't seen in isolation, which is one of the reasons we've gone out to the community safety partnerships as well, to start overlaying that educational data, the health inequality data, actually start to see some structural issues in particular geographical spaces around South Yorkshire. And then what can we do as a partnership to tackle some of those underlying issues? I think that's critical. But on the back of that, the analysts' work that we employed, we've engaged with Sheffield Hallam, and we're working with them to progress that data even further. So we're really keen to see it helps because it's an objective voice rather than it being the police doing, marking our own homework. So we've done quite a lot of work which we're happy to share, but we are taking that the step further to get the academic credentials and input to take us to the next step. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a further question around where, so Simon touched on body-worn video, on the cases where it's not been activated. There's a question about what proportion of these involved a minority ethnic individual. You probably need to come back to that. I imagine it's not something on the top of your head. And a further one around use of force. So if is it policy or procedure to handcuff a driver when they've pulled over and are having their vehicle searched? And would this be classed as a use of force or not?
It is classed as use of force, and it will depend on the individual circumstances. The officers will need to make an assessment as to whether they feel that they are the individual is going to try to destroy any form of property or evidence, or offer any form of evidence. So it's quite rare, but yeah, it is a use of force.
I think in the interest of time, before we move on to the next item, apologies if we have not covered everything that came up on Slido.
Me again. No comment.
It's called delegation.
No comment. Okay, hate crime. Next slide, please. More numbers for you, I'm afraid. So what this is showing is over the last 26 months, hate crime volumes have increased slightly. Since 2023. So the following year they increased by 1.2%, and then the latest year they've increased by 3.7%. So not huge numbers, and certainly doesn't match what we've seen across the country in terms of the increase in hate crime. Now that can be seen as both a positive and a negative. Positive in terms of, well, that's great because people aren't suffering the consequences of being victims of hate crime. A possible negative because, well, maybe they're just not telling us. And I suspect it's maybe a bit of both, if I'm being honest. And that latter point is something I'm really keen that we address. Non-crime hate incidents, which I hope not to go into too much detail on because they're tremendously complicated. Non-crime hate incidents, I've said it now, haven't I? So you probably are going to ask me questions on it. Volumes are decreasing, and this is since they were introduced in 23-24, but they're quite a complicated piece. So next slide, please. Hoping you'll have all forgotten about that. No, I know. As soon as I said it,
we need some Home Office expert to explain it, though.
Absolutely. So hate crime strands. So that's the top bar, which I appreciate is really small for you. So hate race is still the largest proportion. So that's the big orange band across the middle, and at force level that accounts for 69% of all of our hate crimes based on race. And nationally that's 72%. So we're broadly in line with the rest of the country, but it means that 2 out of every 3 victims of hate crime is based on their race. The hate religion, which is the, I'm trying to work out the colour on the top strand, is the dark purple. Higher volumes in Q4, and you can see there that they've slightly fluctuated. So the 2 largest religious groups that are victims of hate religion are Jewish and Muslim. But you can see again there they've sort of fluctuated. Jewish sort of was nearly 20%, dropped down to 16, and then peaked back up to 17. But Muslim religion is by far and away the largest proportion. It's the big green band across the bottom bar charts, and they account for over 50% of hate religion crimes that are recorded in this county. Next slide, please. So,
Do you mind just going back a little bit?
yeah.
Sorry, just back to that. I think, sorry, go, that's it. Would you mind just reading out the
Because I think, again, just making sure we...
So if we say what the hate crime strands, and these are
That's it,
nationally
just read 'em out,
mandated
yeah.
hate crime strands that we have to record against. So Simon, do you want to give them?
Yeah, so hate disability is the light blue at the bottom. Hate as a non-strand is the dark blue line. Hate race is the large orange band. Hate religion is the dark purple. Hate sexual orientation is the sort of the pink band at the top, and then the colour at the very top band is hate transgender, which is, so you can see there that the hate race is by far and away the biggest portion. And then
Do you want to just describe as religions as well that
yeah,
we record?
absolutely. You're really testing me now, really.
Sorry.
That's okay. So the very, very thin line at the bottom, which you probably can't make out, is Buddhist. You then got the yellow, which is Christian. The red line on some of those that appear between above the yellow is Hindu. The dark green band is Jewish. The light green band is Muslim. The orange is no religion. The light blue is religion other. The purple is Sikh, and then the top band is religion unknown. So we have obviously always have those other and unknown, just for the catch-all for others. So they're the sort of the main groups that we look at. Is that okay? So as a force, we've taken part in the Hate Crime Awareness Week in October of each year, and we've worked alongside Simca colleagues and the Crown Prosecution Service. In that week, delivered targeted training awareness sessions for primary and secondary schools, and I'll come on to why that's crucial for us in a moment, and community groups, and that's supported by internal external engagement, just to increase visibility and try to raise awareness and to break down some of those barriers for the point I raised earlier about actually is the lack of reporting down to a lack of confidence or just a reticence to report. So each of the 4 policing districts in South Yorkshire all have a member of police staff who is a hate crime coordinator, and they are classed as our sort of independent force experts really. They review all of our hate crime offences, they contact victims and signpost them to support agencies, they try to engage with our sort of off-site reporting centres to build confidence, and their focus for this year is specifically getting into schools and underrepresented community groups, and again I'll touch on a little bit of that in a moment. We've made a relatively recent change that all of our hate crime investigations now will go to our neighbourhood policing officers, and that'll be universal across the county. So as part of the neighbourhood policing guarantee, obviously all of the police officers in neighbourhoods are now in post, and all hate crimes will be investigated by a neighbourhood officer. We have a new hate training package which is being developed, and that will be rolled out through the latter half of this year, which includes changes to legislation, broad awareness of the sort of changing demographics and cultural differences across the organisation. We've also done our Inclusion Matters training, which highlights some of that already for the wider force, but specifically about hate crime. And then the theme lead is in the process of drafting a new engagement strategy in the coming months, look to tackle that underreporting issue that I've already alluded to, and building confidence and trust. And particularly, and I'll come back to this in a moment, particularly targeted engagement with women and underrepresented groups and 10 to 17-year-olds, which if you go to the next slide, you'll see why that becomes apparent. So if I take you to the disproportionality heading first, just because it leads on from that last point. So we do have disproportionality in our data of hate crime on twofold really. 20% of our suspects for hate crime are aged between 10 and 17. So 1 in 5 of our suspect is a child, which says there's something wrong there in terms of actually how about how children are being brought up, but actually their level of kind of cultural understanding, difference and acceptance of different people. Hence the piece of work, the engagement strategy and work around schools, because that can't be right. 1 in 5 is under 17. The other element of disproportionality is our female victims of hate crime have much lower level of positive action taken than male victims of hate crime. And what we find is predominantly through hate religion, so predominantly Muslim women don't support prosecutions. So they'll report the original offence, but then don't provide the evidence to support prosecution, which makes up quite a significant proportion of our disproportionality. So that's a real focus this year, is actually working with Simca. Actually, how do we change that? Because they've had the confidence to tell us. We now just need to get over that next hurdle and build the confidence to actually provide the evidence and be prepared to support a prosecution. So that's the two main areas of disproportionality for us in hate crime. Go back to clearly global conflict. There's obviously a lot going on nationally and internationally which can have an impact on hate crime statistics. Thankfully, we haven't seen that play out in South Yorkshire. Whilst we've seen a moderate increase in hate crime over the course of the last 26 months, as I alluded to, we haven't seen significant shifts in any individual group as we have elsewhere. So particularly sort of Jewish communities across the country, we haven't seen that play out in South Yorkshire, thankfully. Non-crime hate incidents. So here we go. So non-crime hate incidents, the guidance came out in 2023. So this is where it doesn't, a report of hate that doesn't cross the threshold into a crime, but is classed as essentially abusive or hateful, we would record as a non-crime hate incident. It was challenged back in 2022 because it meant that police were retaining data for somebody who hadn't actually committed a crime. So there's a whole series of guidance around how we do that, how we capture the details of the offence, but don't cross over into capturing people's details. We made sure that we were fully compliant by 2024. That's now been subject to a second challenge in 2025. So it's going back to have another look. So the College of Policing is currently working with the Home Office to look at actually what the new guidance will look like. So we adhere to the standards that were put in place in 2023-24, but the likelihood that's going to change and probably go back to actually recording details. And then finally, as we've talked about in the previous two presentations, is our hate crime scrutiny panel. Now this only sits every 6 months instead of every quarter, mainly because we don't thankfully have significant numbers of hate crime, so actually it needs to be meaningful. But we do get into more cases in that on a 6 monthly basis than we do for stop and search and use of force on it in a quarter. We will look to expand that and try to bring it in line with a quarterly reporting. But we're also cognizant it's yet another scrutiny panel that will be coming to good people like yourselves to try to support us in. So that will be 3 scrutiny panels under my work theme alone, alongside a taser scrutiny panel and police race action scrutiny panel. So we have to strike the right balance of not calling on people's time too much, but actually it being meaningful and getting the right information back. And that is the last slide.
Thank you. Is the tech working? I'll ask a question quickly. I'm really interested in the training that you give to police officers and police staff, particularly things like use of discretion. I mean, there's always opportunities to use discretion. So how does that kind of unconscious bias play into discretion? So what training do you give your officers to be aware of things like that?
So they are given unconscious bias training. So it doesn't necessarily relate specifically to arrest or hate or arrests. So they are given unconscious bias training to try to identify that and for them to be able to acknowledge and take cognizance of it.
And we, in addition to what's embedded in our training programme, we have rolled out inclusion, someone's referenced it earlier, but Inclusion Matters training, which started last September. We're rolling out right across the organisation. We involved, I think the PRAP IAG in kind of testing that for us before it was rolled out. Certainly Mick from the Independent Ethics Panel was also involved in it. So, and we're now at about 70% completion across the whole organisation, which is again that nudge theory against that unconscious bias. Well, I think we've had I think there's always, we didn't need this. There's a bit of feedback, we didn't need this. And I'm like, well, even if you didn't, it's a good reminder. And for those, but I think there's also been feedback this has been really helpful. And I think people have really been grateful that it hasn't been patronising. It was a genuine attempt to get the conversation started about how do we, one, be a more inclusive workplace, but two, think about how we treat our colleagues internally, and also how do we treat members of the public out externally. So it's been, I think I would say it's been probably 70% positive, and then 30% we didn't need this.
I apologise in advance because I am feeling, one, you're probably sick of the sound of my voice, and two, I'm quite emotional about that last agenda item. So I am a Muslim Asian woman, and there are parts of Sheffield and South Yorkshire I do not go to. I have told my hijab wearing mother and daughter to not go out at night. I have heard firsthand of women in this region that have experienced hate crime. So that data to me is really upsetting because it doesn't reflect my lived experience. It's not your fault, but it doesn't reflect my lived experience. And the thing I wanted to ask is, and it's not the police's fault because the police deal with the microcosm of what is happening in UK British society, which is at the mercy of algorithms, which is partly why I think you're seeing the spike of children and young people, but also a lack of leadership in this space of what is not of British value. So I suppose my sort of call to action is, how do we create a space where even women like me who are part of your system, who have experienced racism in the streets of this city, feel comfortable going through the process, because the process is not pleasant. The second thing is, if someone is horrible or racist to me online, not many people know that they can report it. And if you go online and you're a Muslim Asian woman like me, trust me, it's there, the hate crime. And then my final reflection is, we work with a lot of organisations as part of the Race Equality Partnership who are seeing hate behaviours manifesting in their organisations. It's on their campuses, it's in their A&E departments. And faith organisations play a key part of this, but community influencers also do. So I suppose what I'm doing is an urgent appeal, and I'm not speaking for the whole of the city, but I'm trying to give you a face to the numbers that you've just talked about, of this is really real, it's really, really scary, and actually we need help and support from people in privileged positions like yourself, but we need it now. So is there anything we can do in the short term, as well as the longer term plans that you've alluded to really support women like me and others who are right now having to think about what they wear every time they leave the house?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly from our point of view, it's as you'll appreciate, it's really difficult as a white male British police officer to say to a Muslim woman, well, you just need to have the confidence to report a crime. That's never going to work, and we need to nuance our messaging. Absolutely, we do, and we need to use the influence of people such as yourself to actually help to change that narrative and help us to understand how do we best approach this, and how do we best get out into the community and know that, and help people to know that they're supported. Certainly the theme lead for this is working with colleagues in Simca to start that piece of work to look at, we need to change the narrative here, because it can't be that the police, well, you just need to come and tell us. No, that's not that straightforward. We know it's not. But you've absolutely got my commitment that if we get to that position where we can have the support and the evidence provided, we will absolutely be prosecuting wherever the opportunity arises. We just need to break down that final barrier.
Just really quick, Fatima, just to say, so I'm Franca, I've day job at the university, but I'm here also as an independent ethics panel member, and that piece of work that Superintendent was referring to around engaging around hate crime, that's a piece of work that I'll be working on. So if you're happy, I'll get in touch with you, because exactly, you know, the sort of how, that's exactly what I'd like to know. What do we get wrong at the moment? And what do people need to see? Because I think until we speak to communities, so I was hoping to get this out of here. This is great, because what I've got out of here today is a lot of context to reach out to make sure we speak to the right people. So get your contact.
My name is Ibuka Obi. I'm the incoming president of Sheffield Hallam Students Union. Thank you so much for the presentations, for all that has been shared so far. I think I just wanted to share a similar concern. One is on the fact that engagement so far has been mainly with primary, secondary schools, less about student unions or the student community, but also to ask what campaigns, what engagements have been in place in order to proactively sensitize members of community around these conditions. Because yes, it is good to see that there are positive outcomes when there is this proportionality, which is, to be honest, upsetting to see. But there's work that can be done as well in terms of proactively sensitizing people on these issues. So it will be helpful to hear how you are approaching that. It could be campaigns, it could be anything. So that's what I would really like to know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've started our focus on the primary, secondary schools to get into that group of 10 to 17-year-olds that make up, in my view, a disproportionate number of offenders. They don't make up that proportion in many other crime types. So for this crime type in particular, that's a real worry. That's a cultural issue there that we need to address through primary and secondary schools. But absolutely, I'll be talking to our comms link at the back and the theme lead to actually then how we roll that out then into further and higher education establishments as well. I think we need to start with those and then work up.
Hello, my name is Carlton Rivers. I have too many hats. So right here, I was until recently one of the co-chairs for the Race Action Plan to support the South Yorkshire Police to reach out some of the issues that we need to scrutinize. I'm now a member, so contact Adrian, who's sitting in the front. I'm doing my PhD on serious youth violence, and many of the things that I come across it's not necessarily just how young people get involved, but we know there are baked inequalities, structural racism, and many other issues and nuances that affect and factors that affect young people across the board in all South Yorkshire. My question, with regard to this, I put a post yesterday on LinkedIn just to say how growing up in the UK and quite recently how things have changed. I am not somebody who gets scared of people walking behind me, but how things have changed now is that we are picking up the pieces, if you like, which is actually part of my research. But we're picking up the pieces, and those of us in frontline, those of us in communities or embedded into communities, and those of us who are known to communities for different ads, we can see it, and we know that the reporting is an issue. We had these kind of questions, these kind of discussions when I was a councillor, 2018, of reporting hate crime. So we know this. We know this has been a problem. And now, if you ask me as a Muslim woman who's not really fearing of how to contact any of you, the reason that Muslim women might not report is what we all started here today, which is trust. We need to know where that is going, where that report's going. Many of them say to us, what's the point? To be honest, I've been verbally and racially attacked so many times at the moor that I just walk away now. And when one of my colleagues in the group, or one of your colleagues, asked me why didn't you report, that he was one of the coordinators I met 2 weeks ago, I said, well, if I contacted you, then really nothing would have happened, because that was a 90-year-old woman. What exactly can you do? But for data reasons, yes, we have to report it. So if we're just reporting it for data so we can see the increase, then our communities are going to say, well, you're just collecting data. Nothing's going to happen. So we need to change the language. We need to change who to work with in the communities in a grassroots level aspect of it. And one last thing, in terms of schools between 10 and 17-year-olds, yes, that's become an increasing. I personally have seen it myself in my school, which I'm not going to mention. And that's because of what's happening in social media and what's happening around them. So Learn Sheffield, this is one thing that's happening. Learn Sheffield is going to schools about race equality and speaking to young people about diversity. So that's an ongoing thing in the council that could actually be leaned into. But reporting, well, tell us what we can do to help you. And we really need to try and do this together.
Thank you. I'm just going to get some more points because I'm really mindful that we've got to get all the agenda items in. So, David, yourself, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Just 3 quick points. I really echo everything that has been said by my Muslim sisters, and it's different for me as a black man, but ability very much there. And I'm old enough to have lived through the National Front and the BNP and all the rest of it, and it feels very different this time round, largely because people who behave in that way are emboldened by the political context in which we live. I'll just leave that there. The two other points. 3 very powerful presentations tonight that will require more work, and all that work does seem to be predicated very much on the use of scrutiny panels and also engagement. So the 2 questions: how are scrutiny panels resourced? And then also there are lots of community organisations, including ones like mine, who are very involved around community engagement and having the conversations and hearing the authentic voice of communities. What scope is there for building on that to take this conversation forward?
Hi, I'm Anne Louise from Doncaster. Firstly, thank you. I've learned so much today. They were really good, really interesting. But I'm absolutely horrified about the statistics about children. No kid is ever born racist. None. They're not. So where is it coming from? You know, the list is endless with it. But I want to know, like, for me as a parent, if one of mine ever did anything, they won't see daylight for a while. I'm telling you, they just wouldn't. But I want to know what happens when a child commits a hate crime, even at age 10. I'm just horrified. It shouldn't be in the brain, should it? It shouldn't. What happens to that child? And are the parents held responsible for their little darling's actions? Yeah. Then the last point I want to make, you keep going about rolling things out into schools. You're missing a massive part of society, the home education. There's thousands in South Yorkshire now. I mean, I used to be one, mine are older now. But I think that you take your boxes for engaging with the home ed community, and also you're being inclusive then by including those children. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to be able to do a quick roundup of that? Because I do want to, I've got a question just to broaden. I know, just give me a second. It's getting really good, but I don't think people want to stay for another half an hour after the 7 o'clock point, so just bear with me. If you could do a quick roundup, we will respond as well through correspondence, anything that we need to come up with, you know, the next steps, what we're going to do. And then do your bit, and I've got 2 questions. So.
Okay, so I think there were 4 questions in there. So I think the latter point, the electively home educated, that is a really difficult cohort for us to reach, for lots of professionals to reach, and that certainly for me locally in Barnsley is a real concern about the children that aren't seen by a professional 1 week to the next. And by professional I mean anybody, teaching assistant. So that's something, unfortunately that's a national issue and not something that we're going to necessarily be able to address here locally in South Yorkshire. Your first part of the question, so if a 10-year-old engages in a crime, whether it be a hate crime or any other crime, they'll be subject to the same process as they would for any other. Arguably at that age, what we'd probably rather do is seek to educate through their actions, and probably go down the sort of informal route where they actually get to understand from the victim what the impact that's had on them, because I suspect the vast majority of our 10 to 17-year-olds have no idea of the impact of the offences they're committing. So that would be our primary role, our primary effort would be to try to educate where possible. And then going back to your points in terms of scrutiny panels, the resourcing for that is done through the theme lead. So each theme within South Yorkshire Police has got a theme lead, and the tend to have officers working alongside them, so we work alongside some of the panel members then to start to formulate the scrutiny panel. But your latter point's really key for us, and I think it comes across all three presentations that I've done this evening. I would really welcome anyone in here's support in broadening the diversity of those scrutiny panels, and actually even perhaps engaging in a follow-on conversation from those scrutiny panels around actually what else can we do then, not just scrutinising our use of powers or individual crimes, but actually how do we start to change some of this narrative? How do we really impact on trust and confidence? Whilst this is useful because you can go and feed back and say, yeah, we've seen what the police do, we've scrutinised it, we've looked at the body worn video, we've seen the forms, and actually, you know, it's all fine. But again, that we need more than that. We definitely need more than that in the long term. So we really welcome any conversation.
So I'd ask, people probably want to go quickly after this, but could you just send us an email? You've got it, and you know, if you want to be engaged in it, then we can share that information. Is that okay? Do you want to quickly run through?
Yeah, just to quickly summarise some of the comments. Really strong messages around building awareness of hate crime, what it is, what more both Simca, South Yorkshire Police to engage with communities around understanding, to build that confidence around reporting, and then some specific things around action taken. And I don't know if there's anything you want to reflect on areas where you feel like action taken is stronger. There's a specific question around female hate crime victims, for example, here.
I can probably feed that back. I have got a graph with lots of statistics on for the different groups, but I think that would maybe just take us over.
I just wanted to ask a couple of questions because I do want to broaden this out around the hate crime agenda. When I first came to South Yorkshire, it was probably a year ago now, I went to one of the IAGs in Sheffield City Centre with Paul Ferguson, and it was on the back of the Supreme Court judgment in relation to transgender, and I was interested to ask if we've seen any spikes in hate towards transgender individuals, and also I might as well ask as the secondary bit, there is a significant level of hate crime against disabled people. So again, resources are tight. We've heard about the horrific experiences in relation to race, but not wanting to make sure there's an equitable access to people experiencing hate crime. I'm just really interested in just broadening it, just if we can.
I mean, actually, transgender is quite a small proportion at the top, but the proportion doesn't change the emphasis that we give to the crime type, because clearly, whether it's through transgender or race or religion, it matters not for us. It's the impact on the individual that really is the crucial part, and it's the fact that it's the hateful act that it's been committed. So the relevance of the crime types doesn't really change for us. It's a hate crime, and the victim has suffered as a consequence of that. So arguably, regardless of what proportion it is, it should all be dealt with seriously. No, we haven't. Not for transgender.
I think it's probably just worth thinking though that, for example, for members of the transgender community, whilst they may not have experienced a spike in hate crime, they may be really fearful of hate crime. So actually that fear is impacting on their life. And Simon recently, in his presentation, talked about we haven't seen a spike in anti-Semitic hate crime, but I know, having been to the synagogue recently, the synagogue is behind padlocked gates 24/7 because people are living in fear. So even though that that fear may not be becoming realised in our communities, that fear is still there. And I think we need to be really cognizant of that as well in our policing approach.
Thank you for that. And yeah, we've got to remember that the fear, irrespective of the subject matter, is real and keeps people locked in their prisoners in their own homes, isn't it, really? Okay, I'm going to move us swiftly on to the final agenda, which is the Police Race Action Plan.
Okay, thank you. So just a little bit of background about the Police Race Action Plan. So in May 2022, nationally, the Police Race Action Plan was launched, and the ethos underneath this was to improve policing for black and black heritage people. it wanted to ensure black people are represented, they're not over policed and not under protected basically. We needed to put this into a local context, so we knew what was important to our communities and our workforce and what we needed to prioritise. So to build on that national plan, we collaborated with colleagues from the IAG and also from some of our workforce to come up with 6 priorities or 6 key themes that would drive our activity locally. So these were identified as building an anti-racist, inclusive and informed workforce, increasing representation, proportionate use of police powers, improving relations and confidence within communities, supporting our black colleagues, and achieve justice and protect victims from harm. And it's those 6 themes that we've been using since that time to really drive our activity, look at data underneath, as Mr. Wanless has just gone through in depth, and also to look at what matters to people that work for us and alongside us. In September 2025, the national picture around this changed a little bit, which affected how we needed to record activity and things that we needed to report against. And the national team produced what's called a maturity matrix that the IAD have heard a lot about in the last few months. And this is a tool that we can use to measure and assess and be held to account against what we have done as South Yorkshire Police. But it's also there for us to sense check with our communities how they score our activity as well. We're now aligning our local plan to the maturity matrix because in September, October time we need to do our next national return, and we want to make sure it's as accurate and reflective as possible of the activity that's been going on. Next slide please. Thank you. So some of the progress and successes around the PRAP over the last probably 12 to 18 months, a lot of this activity has taken place. So as Marn Pullman's mentioned, Inclusion Matters training has been a massive piece of work. On that slide it says 61% of colleagues, but as this is literally weekly delivery, it is now up to just over 70% of our workforce. And to put this into context, this is everybody that works for South Yorkshire Police, whatever role you are in. We've had to adapt delivery for people that, such as cleaning staff, have had to have it over sort of sections of hours of input rather than the full day. But we are adapting it to make sure we are including everybody in this delivery. Some of the ethos underneath this delivery is also to mix up groups that are attending. So it's not a room full of police officers, it's a very mixed delivery. So you might get file prep clerks along with response officers, along with the chief constable. It is every role, every rank within the police that have attended this, and as Marm's mentioned, largely the feedback has been positive. That is rolling on, and that's scheduled that the current workforce will have all had that training by roughly August of this year. But it will also be delivered to new people in the organisation to make sure that everybody has had that. And as was also mentioned, the key elements of that were tested against either members of our workforce to see what their view was. A lot of our support networks also come in, and obviously the IAG were invited to observe and offer feedback because it needed to be right. We've also reviewed all our training to make sure equality and inclusivity is embedded. So what we mean by that is it should be a common thread through everything we do. We're here to be fair, impartial and ethical, and it's really important that our training delivery reflects that. As Mr. Wanless has mentioned, we're fluid with this, so if there is something that becomes a key theme, we need to adapt our training delivery to make sure we're giving our officers and staff the tools to act in the way we want them to. We've also reached an 8-year high in the number of new recruits from ethnic minority backgrounds. This is something we keep a close eye on because we do want to be representative of our communities, and we also need to make sure our entry routes are attractive from a variety of communities and demographics. So you may or may not be aware, a lot of work's gone on to look at the entry routes we offer, and we're actively monitoring that to see if it is attracting more diverse applicants. We're also looking at where we might be losing applicants along that journey. So if we're losing people at an application, what can we do to help them and support them through? And that's something we're monitoring via our HR function that I sit on to make sure we're aware of what we need to put in place. So we also facilitate dedicated coaching, mentoring and development sessions, and this is something that Marn Pullman leads on really. So these are a mentoring scheme where there's specific topics that are identified. So although this is an offering we've done previously, I think it's fair to say we've relaunched it based on some feedback from people that wanted to interact. And this is making it so that we're not doing something to them, we're asking them what they need and what we can do to support them and what's a priority to them to help them progress. And that seems to be very well received. I think the next session's in a couple of weeks, Mum, isn't it? We've also launched a Say to Stay initiative to support retention. So on that slide that says 19 colleagues. As of today we're up to 24. Now what that is, it's a way that if someone is considering leaving the organisation, they are invited to have more of an informal discussion as to why. So is it something we can put in place that means you feel more welcome to stay? Is it something that's out of our control, such as medical, etc.? It's just to understand why people are even considering leaving us and what we can do to try and retain them. Of those 24, 12 of them are diverse, ethnically diverse colleagues that our positive action sergeant is then personally engaged with. And definitely, although this is in its infancy, so some of these are only new, 2 of them have actually elected to stay, and he supported them through either progression or changing roles. So again, it's something we will monitor to see how effective it is and what impact it has, but it's just another tier to try and show the workforce we support them. We have improved recording of use of power, reasonable grounds that I think Mr Wanless has gone through sufficiently. Developing and launching an app to record vehicle stops. So historically you could stop a car, and unless you were going on to deal with that person for either enforcement or searching, you wouldn't necessarily need to even document that you stopped, and that was a massive gap in our data, especially around disproportionality. So working with our data team, there's now an app and there's a real push to make sure that officers are now completing that, so we do understand where the stops are taking place and sort of the ethnicity and other demographics of who we are stopping. And we're looking at further tech solutions when we change our main system that will make that mandated so they can't skip through it. And that should give us a better understanding. As mentioned on there, we have internal and external groups to scrutinise use of powers and internal procedures, and also internal external groups whose lived experience informed our activities. I think we've probably gone through the IAGs quite well tonight, but obviously the Police Race Action Plan is one that's really well established and represented in this room. We have established a dedicated peer support group to address and overcome issues and challenges. So this meets quarterly, and it's a Black Heritage Advisory group that just gives people a safe space to highlight any issues, anything that they feel is a gap in the organisation, anything they need additional support from. Gives us a platform to identify if there are trends or if there's things we need to put in place to support individuals, but it also gives them a voice in a protected environment, and it allows us to loop back with what we do as a result. We also have well-established staff support networks including in that. We have been nationally recognised for supporting colleagues who are assaulted or suffer hate crime. So what we have put in place as a force is a process where if you are an officer or staff member that is subjected to hate crime, whether that's verbal or otherwise, you are treated the same way as an officer that's been assaulted. So that's enhanced levels of support, enhanced welfare check, offerings, and very specific contact, etc. from your command team to make sure you know that we don't tolerate that and we are there to look after you. Utilising partnership capabilities to prevent disproportionality and victimisation. Again, I think we've probably gone through that in a lot of the previous inputs. And conducting research to identify and understand any disproportionality concerning victims and subjects. So we did have a dedicated analyst, as was mentioned before, but now we're working in conjunction with Sheffield Hallam University to look at what further research and academic studies might be relevant around that. So next slide, please. So challenge.
We've got 5 minutes to also have questions.
It's okay, I'll talk quick.
Last
yeah, this is the last slide. So challenges, so aligning our activities under the local plan. So what we mean by this is we've had 6 themes and we now need to marry that across 14 standards. So it's making sure that we're identifying where the gaps are and putting things in place to make sure we're doing something around it. Ensuring training and systems support the delivery of our local plan are fully and consistently embedded. So we've done the Inclusion Matters training. What comes next is nudge. So these are going to be smaller, bespoke training deliveries, so that all the learning of that is a little reminder to people what we've told them. These might be about psychological safety, it could be about microaggressions, unconscious bias was mentioned, just to make sure we are showing that this is what we stand for and this is what we expect of you. Increasing representation, particularly with senior ranks, so it's to embed the initiatives I've just gone through. Ensuring engagement activities reach and involve demographics, so we've discussed this at length, but as Mar mentioned, we have 2 youth events planned within the next 3 weeks, and we're also going to do some online events in July that we're going to invite as many people as we can to sense check our maturity matrix against, and we're really hopeful that will also help with some of the representation as well. And then improving black communities' confidence to report crime and identify, addressing disproportionality. So again, I think we've gone through some of that around trust, how we build the relationship so we can be trusted to deal with these reports consistently, I guess. And that was really quick.
Thank you, I really appreciate that. We've got like 5 or 6 questions that have come on and a 3 question. I've asked Matt to do magic and bring it all together as one big question, sort of thematically. I do want to give time to Lauren to be able to respond as an overview as the Chief Constable as well. So if you could just bear with us. Is that okay, Lauren? We'll do it that way. So if you can do that, please.
Yeah, and with many thanks to Adrian Bent, I believe he's here. He's put a question in which essentially acknowledges all the good work around that's been outlined there around representation, scrutiny arrangements. But his question that I will summarise and echo some of the other questions we've had is really about what measurable outcomes there have been and what evidence we have that community confidence has been improved, particularly from the black community. So I think that's.
Okay, so I'll take that one, thank you, and then hopefully we'll be able to then move on to the next bit and get you all out on time to see you kick off. So grateful for the question that was put forward in advance, so it did enable a sort of bit of thinking about it ahead of sitting here today. So there is a challenge around trust and confidence data generally, and actually the robustness of that and the real academic understanding of what drives trust and confidence. And we've heard today lots of different life experiences that I think demonstrate the really complex picture that sits beyond the headlines that traditionally get aggregated into trust and confidence measures. And I think that through your involvement in the IAG for the Race Action Plan, you'll know that data disaggregated by ethnicity is not readily available to us. I think there are some key statistics, however, that would demonstrate a shift in confidence. So since the launch of the National Race Action Plan, the Crime Survey for England and Wales, which is a fairly consistent measure annually, tells us that the percentage of black and black heritage people aged over 16 who report having confidence in their local police has increased from 60 to 64%. Local data also tells us that while historically black victims have been less likely to report crimes to us, the number of recorded incidents with a black victim has increased by 22% in the same period. Some of that improvement is about our improved data quality in terms of recording ethnicity more robustly, but there is also some genuine increase in there as well. You'll also know that the maturity matrix, which Shaz referenced, will be measured, assessed and accounted for from the end of September this year. So that will guide us to assess and publish our assessment against a range of measures, and that will be very much informed by what our communities are telling us as well. Over time, and it may take a few years to develop, I think we've got to be honest that this is not quick. Those scores will tell us how our black colleagues and our black communities feel about South Yorkshire Police, our progress towards improvement, and act as an indicator of trust and confidence, but I do think there's more work to be done to understand that. You'll know that the scoring process has already started, but again there's work ongoing to make sure that we broaden that out across all of South Yorkshire, and Shaz has already referenced the engagement events that we're doing with young people next week to help hopefully grow on that as well. So it's been mentioned a couple of times about joining our scrutiny panels, joining some of our AIGs. I think the point that was made about actually you've got meetings that are things that are already established. This isn't just a one-way street of us saying, please come to our meetings. If there's an opportunity for us to come to yours and to engage with you in that way, really happy to do that. It's got to be a mutually supportive relationship. It should not just be about us making demands on you to give up your precious time to come and help us. We want to work with you proactively as well. I was going to reiterate, it's unfortunate that Fatima's just left. I was going to reiterate the point about a load of this information is available on our internet, but I take the point that people probably aren't going to look at the internet. So I think over the course of the evening there have been quite a number of points to take away, reflect on, and then probably report back on at the next community confidence board in relation to, so what have we done differently as a consequence of some of the comments and thoughts that we've heard today, because some of them I've got notes written all over different things, because there are little seeds of things like, yeah, we need to do that differently, and actually really grateful to you all for being here today and for sharing your thoughts with us so openly as well.
I have just warned Lauren that given the topics, given the sensitivities that we're all feeling, given the allegations of two-tier policing, but when we see the data, it does cause us to think about how complex this is and how you articulate it without being accused of being biased one way or another. So I did ask Lauren if she wanted to say something about that. That's a bit tricky, I understand, but I think what we've seen today, I think there's an education piece and a challenge piece about what the police are trying to grapple with, and the communities as well.
Yeah, so I think the noise around two-tier policing at the moment is incredibly unhelpful, and it is driven by incredibly divisive politics that make policing and living within diverse communities incredibly difficult for everybody. So I'm sure everybody would be aware that the notion of two-tier policing is that policing treat minority groups preferentially to sort of established white communities. All the data that we've had presented tonight would indicate that that is absolutely not the case, but there exists, particularly on social media, echo chambers and algorithms that are reinforcing this message around two-tier policing, and it is deeply unhelpful. It's an unwelcome distraction, and it frustrates the efforts of policing to in quite a significant extent to do what we need to do with all of our communities. And I don't want to make that a political statement, I think it's just a statement of truth. And I think there's one very real example from the weekend which I think is just worth sharing by way of illustration. We had a protest and a counter-protest in Sheffield over the weekend. During the course of that protest, a number of arrests were made, I think 6 or 7 in total.
Yeah.
One of those arrests was of a young male. Force was used against that male in terms he was taken to the ground. Within hours, footage of that arrest was shared across the world. It incited commentary around the leadership of South Yorkshire Police, about our gender, our sexuality, all sorts of things that you just wouldn't quite believe were the case. But not only that, within hours, somebody had used, or more than one person had used, AI to manipulate the imagery to show the officer making the arrest to be black when he wasn't, against the white offender, to be used to say this is a prime example of two-tier policing. So I think it's just really worth making the point that there's a huge amount of misinformation, malinformation and disinformation out there, which is why events like this and speaking to people in the real world is actually what policing needs to focus on in order to make the progress that we need to make.
And I'd have put it out there that if there are communities, white communities, who feel underprivileged and who feel marginalised, then come and have the conversation as well, because that's the whole point. This is a wide conversation for everybody who feels disenfranchised, prisoners in their own homes, don't have access to opportunities. You know, let's have this conversation and let's be able to show that we do want to offer opportunities to everybody. So on that note, can I thank you all for being patient with us. It was our first trial at this. I think the tech worked. I think we will try and suggest people submit more questions up front next time. The roaming white worked, so thank you so much for that. Obviously, thank you. You've contributed really well and listened, and hopefully you'll give us feedback. I'm sorry about the layout of the tables. It's really difficult. We didn't know how many people were coming. We have to put things out, so, but you know, maybe next time we'll have a bit of an engagement piece as well before we sit down. Can I thank the team as well, the tech team, you know, there's people behind that door making sure the cameras are working and the PowerPoints and the comms people, so thank you for that. Thank you for Matt for doing your best with the tech. And thank you for our police colleagues for coming up here, facing questions that you didn't know you were going to face and being as frank and honest, but actually open and willing to listen and learn and reach out to the communities. So on that note, get your England shirts on, come on England, and take care.